So Brett, obviously, what's main takeaways from what you've seen so far? I don't know if you've read the whole 200 pages, but they've come out with their, recommendations and all that stuff. So what's your takeaway here?
I mean, you don't have to get too far into it to read that they don't think that any of their officers failed in any way, shape, or form, or that they say that they're not going to discipline any of their officers. So at that point, everything else is just a moot point because who is holding their officers accountable? And all of these agencies keep saying that none of their officers failed. So if nobody fell, then why were those kids bleeding out for 77 minutes, right? And that's what's infuriating to me.
Some of the key aspects that I saw in there, at least, are the 188 CBP officers that were there, CBP agents that either responded or were working to help the response, and none of them establishing that command post, and none of them kind of taking charge of the scene despite being federal officers. How does that make you look at the situation, knowing that 188 of them were there and yet did not take control of the scene?
Like, I mean, it's nothing new, right? I mean, we had a total of 376 officers there. Nobody did anything, right? Um, but I know that they justify that by saying that, oh, well, they weren't sure what their jurisdiction was, yada yada yada. But I have an issue with that, right? So if a bank is being robbed, it's a federal crime, and then Border Patrol isn't worried about jurisdiction, right? But Border Patrol is a part of the Department of Homeland Security. The Department of Homeland Security's job is to prevent and stop domestic and foreign terrorism. Now, are school shootings not considered domestic terrorism? If somebody is shooting up into a building with all these people, is that not domestic terrorism? So I think that that's just a cop out so that they do not have to discipline any officers, so that they do not have to admit any fault.
There's also a part in there where they need to establish a way to get a key and a layout of a school and, all of these things. Yeah, I believe in a previous report we read that the door wasn't locked, or that nobody had actually tried the door. So when you see more reports like this come out and just adds to the ineptitude of what happened that day, how much anger does that kind of put inside of you?
Oh, I'm extremely frustrated. And I'm so frustrated, right? That the excuse that they use is such a ridiculous one. Doors. Like, to leave your house, you have to go through a door. To go to your office, you have to go through a door. To get into that hallway so that you can sit outside of this classroom for 77 minutes, you had to go through a door. But all of a sudden, the door is a problem, right? And we're making assumptions about, oh, it's locked. So we thought that this shooter just, we don't know how he walked in there, right? But we're going to assume that he came back out and locked the door from the outside while there were officers on the scene, knowing that he didn't do that. All of this is just BS rhetoric so that they can try to defend their actions. And it really truly comes down to they were scared of dying from getting shot from that AR.
Meantime, obviously your son and 20 others were in there having to deal with it themselves.
Mhm.
There was also a part in there, I believe, it said since there was 188 officers there, that there was an inconsistent messaging, or there was an inconsistency in their training. When you hear that a federal agency isn't prepared to handle an active shooter situation, what is your take, or how does that make you think of this?
Well, that's a supervisor fell, right? Like if you're a supervisor, if you're in this position of power and you are to be, you're the one that is in charge to make sure that your officers are trained, and you're not making sure that they're trained, then that is a you problem, and then you should be removed from your job, right? Once again, it's a cop out though, right? Because Uvalde wasn't the first school shooting. This isn't something new. This isn't a revolutionary thing that has never happened before. So we don't know what to do. We consistently have mass school shootings all the time. How is this something that we are not prepared for?
And then the broad 30,000-foot view is this is just another report. It's 201 pages of things that you guys are now being put through again. I was talking to Berlinda earlier, and it's an emotional day for her. How does this, from a dad point of view, make you look at this and relive the death of your son, who we see right behind you?
So, on days like today, when information like this is dropped, what it really does is it infuriates me, right? Because I live the pain, I live the empty, I live the hurt every single day. This doesn't exacerbate that, right? To me, what it does is it infuriates me because it's just excuse after excuse after excuse, right? And so, like with this particular one, with the DOJ report, it said officer 1, officer 2, officer 3, so you could at least track which officers were doing what. But in this report, everything is redacted so heavily that we don't know. So if I see BPA agent or BPA and then it's redacted, and then on the next sentence it says BPA and it's redacted, how can I track to see if that's the same individual or not? So they talk about transparency, and they talk about coming forth and being honest and everything, and they're not. And it's once again another cop out that nobody is being held responsible for, and it pisses me off.
Right. I mean, how are you supposed to? How is even an agency supposed to hold their own people accountable if they aren't telling anybody who those agents are?
Exactly, exactly.
Um, Another part was the limitations of this report. At least had are some of your favorite people that did not want to participate in this or give any sound, and that was Mariano Pargas, that was Chief
Mhm.
Arredondo, that was Ruben Nolasco, that was Johnny Fields. All of these guys, none of them wanted to participate in this or give their interviews. What does that tell you?
Well, it just goes to show you that they're guilty, that they knew that they messed up, that they knew that they're failures, that they know that they should not, first of all, have their badges and their guns, and they secondly should not have the positions that they do within this community, right? That's what it tells us. If you have nothing to hide, then why aren't you talking about it? If you have nothing to hide, why don't you talk to these investigators? Even though that I fully think that, by investigating yourself, you're not going to find anything wrong, right? Like that's like asking your students to grade each other's papers. Everybody's getting 100, and that's what we see over and over again. But if you refuse this, right, then that just shows how guilty you are.
At this point, with all of these reports, and we've gotten at least four of them now, and we still have a DPS one to come at some point, whenever the hell that is. Um, is it kind of like almost like white noise? Like we kind of know what happened that day now. We kind of have the picture. To you guys, to you, the family, is it almost like, do we need these anymore?
So, to me personally, no. But what we do need is we need all of the body cam footage released up until they enter that classroom. I do not think that the world deserves to see my child's, mangled, slaughtered body. Absolutely not. But up until that moment of breach, we need to see the world needs to see who did what, who said what, because our officers are not being held accountable. So then we need to at least understand what is going on. We need to see who failed, because that is the only amount of justice that we are ever going to get, is the knowledge of who did what, because we already know that the system is so rigged and these cops only watch out for each other that nothing is ever going to happen to them.
And that's all I got for you, Brett. Anything else you'd like to add?
Not none that you can put on TV, because I got a whole bunch of 4-letter words I got to say right now.